All right, it's 5:33, and we'll call the hearing board to order. This is the November 6, 2006 meeting of the APCD hearing board. All members of the board are present. For those giving testimony tonight, please rise to be sworn by the clerk.
You do solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending before the board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do.
We will be hearing tonight petition number 788, a petitioner of Meissner Filtration Products, Inc., for a short variance from APCD Rule 29C, conditions on permits and violation of permit conditions, and Rule 29.2, new source review requirements. Will the representative of the petitioner please state your name and your position or job title for the record?
My name is Christopher Meissner, President of Meissner Filtration Products, Inc.
Welcome, and go ahead and present your petition to us, please.
Yes, I'd like to request a short-term variance, specifically to allow time for testing results to come in for repairs that were done on the oxidizer. It's during the last source test review. The efficiency was approximately 92% instead of the required 97%. So we've initiated repairs and are now waiting for results to see if those repairs were successful.
Mr. Meissner, have you had a chance to read the staff report that's dated November 1st?
I have.
Do you disagree with any of the facts or background in that staff report?
No.
Do I add anything?
Just a comment I mentioned to Keith Duvall at the beginning of this that he thought would be relevant. We're not currently using any hexane, and that could be, I know, a little bit more of a health concern. So that's not currently being. There's no emissions of hexane.
What do we have emissions-wise available?
Isopropyl alcohol and N-methylpyrrolidone, or NMP for short.
But your hexane, you're not doing any hexane at this time?
That's correct.
Does the board have any questions for the petition? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question is, will you be in compliance for your system will be fully functional, operational? I believe you said the 14th of November.
That's correct. The repairs were actually completed approximately 2 weeks ago, and we conducted the testing. We are now just waiting for those results to make sure that indeed the repairs were successful. The heat exchanger did have, when it was removed, there were holes in the tubes that separate the inlet to the flame, and that would allow some bypass. So those tubes were replaced.
My last question is under item D.
Mr. Let me interrupt you. Could you turn on your microphone so that the record can be
I
clean?
apologize. The last question is item D on page 7, where it deals with the applicant is given consideration of curtailing operations in lieu of obtaining a variance. And the last sentence is, as such, we have significantly curtailed operations. Is that what you're referring to when you said elimination of hexane?
No. Historically, we've emitted close to...
Wait, excuse me one moment. Where are you reading from, Mr. Gasparino?
I'm reading on the information that's provided in the actual information that was submitted by the petitioner, page 7, his answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Great. Thank you very much. Sorry for the interruption. Go ahead, Mr. Meissner.
Historically, before we had the oxidizer, we were emitting close to 5 tons of isopropyl alcohol. And then to increase operations, and as part of our membrane casting operation, we added a thermal oxidizer, and we're then able to add that capacity to oxidize isopropyl alcohol from the clean room. what we're doing now is we're running the equipment and running the process less until we achieve results. So even though we have a two-shift crew that normally runs the membrane casting operation, we're basically using inventory and running those operations less, so that we're not actually using as much chemicals, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
One other comment along that line. Even though our efficiency has dropped from 97% to 92%, we're still not exceeding more than our allotted amount of emissions. I realize we're still not in compliance, but we're just using less chemicals and recycling much more.
Any other questions from the board of the petitioner? Mr. Herlock.
I have some questions. I just want to understand from the background material, it appears that you shut down beginning October 6th and have been shut down with the possible exception of the source testing since then?
No. We did shut down on approximately October 6th to begin. We had a consulting company come out to look at the oxidizer and give us an estimate as to what he thought was wrong with it and what would be involved in repairs. That took approximately 3 days, just partly because there were some inefficiencies in scheduling our production and having him come out, fly out. We then operated for approximately 3 more days, and then we shut down for another full week and conducted repairs.
So are you in operation right now?
We are in operation now.
So you're operating in violation of your permit without a variance?
It's my understanding that we could operate without, until this hearing, that we could continue to operate. I don't know if that's correct or not.
Well, perhaps when we speak to the district, we'll ask them that question.
It's an important question. I guess I'd like to get that clarified before I proceed. If we can,
Why don't we do that first? Mr. Duval, can you answer that question?
Well, the district has enforcement discretion, and what we typically do is if the variance is granted and a business has continued to have to operate or continue to operate and the variance is granted, we do use enforcement discretion back to the time of the filing of the petition.
So technically, the Meisner operation is in violation? No. We don't know.
Well, based on, we still have to go on the results of the failed source test. But if the test that they're awaiting comes back and shows compliance, then their compliance really was the date of when they did that source test, which was October 24th.
Got it. Does that answer your question?
why wasn't this treated as an emergency variance under those conditions?
Not sure.
Mr. Stubblefield.
Mr. Duval,
Yes, sir.
but part of the confusion is on the second page of this this document from the district that gives the background.
Yes.
It says on October 5th and 6th, the facility operated normally. After October 6th, the oxidizer was shut down for inspection and repair. And it doesn't say anything to the effect that it reopened or was turned back on. Like that. Is that the source of your
I wrote that, and that was my understanding, was that it operated for the 2 days, then shut down for inspection, maintenance, repair, and then the testing on the 24th. And so that was the way I understood it. So it sounds like given the testimony, it sounds like I misunderstood.
Yeah.
But
We
really, it
have to rewrite
operated,
that.
correct, during that period?
There was a period of a few days where it operated. If I can give you the exact days. The inspection started on the 6th, which I don't have my calendar in front of me, but I believe that was a Wednesday. And it took until Tuesday of the following week. And on Tuesday of that week, we operated from that Tuesday until Friday, October 14th. So if you have a calendar.
Your dates are slightly off. The 13th was a Friday. The 6th
Yes,
was
the
a
13th.
Friday.
The 6th was a Friday?
Yeah.
The inspection period was about 3 days, which would have put it, I guess, until that Wednesday. And then from that Wednesday till that Friday, we operated.
Anything further? Mr. Herlock, anything further?
Yeah, I'm still trying to understand the basis for your, I'll say, thinking that it was okay to operate. When you had the discussion with district staff on, I think, the 5th to the 6th, who did you speak to?
I was speaking with Chris Cody and working diligently with her to try and select the best way to both get the system repaired as quickly as possible and as well as comply with whatever regulations, trying to understand whatever regulations we needed to comply with.
Did you understand that it was okay to continue operating the facility based on the test report?
It was my understanding that that if we applied for the short-term variance, that we could continue to operate during this interim period if unless the hearing board said that we could not continue to operate. But that interim period, that we could still operate.
Dr. Shackman, any questions? Does the district have any questions for the petitioner?
I've got a few for Mr. Meisner. You mentioned the issue about the hexane, that you're no longer using hexane. During the proposed variance period, will you be using any hexane?
No, we will not be using any hexane during this variance period.
Okay. It sounds to me, it sounds that some of your product can be tested with water, and some is hydrophobic that requires isopropyl alcohol or solvent or an alcohol material. What percentage of your product is water test or?
There's the majority is water tested. Approximately 80% of our membranes are water tested, and about 20% of those products are tested in a mixture of. We now dilute the alcohol in 60% IPA and 40% water. The dilution further minimizes our use of alcohol.
During this period that's in question that we've been talking about, that you operated from early October, were you using the IPA? material or water?
Water materials.
So since early October, since you got the source test results, have you used any IPA material for testing?
I would have to check our production records. Probably we have used alcohol during this period of time.
Okay.
If I understand the question, that means since October 5th till now,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, since
No,
then.
I'm sure they would have during this time frame.
Okay. Your petition mentioned that if the variance is granted, that you would take actions to stay below your permitted emissions. What would those actions be?
I checked our records for the year, and we're using approximately 50% of our allowable chemicals, and so my goal was to make sure that our emissions at 92% did not exceed 5 tons per year, and we're well below that now, and I'll make sure that we stay well below that.
So you could put on a spreadsheet or do the calculations on a periodic basis to show that?
Correct.
Okay. Have you received any complaints from any neighboring businesses of odors, anything like that?
No complaints.
Okay. Those are all the questions that I have.
Does the board have any further questions for the district? Dr.
I
Scheck?
do have a question. What sort of volume of solvent are we talking about here? Could you give me an idea?
I believe on an annual basis, they're permitted to use up to 50,000 pounds of both isopropyl alcohol and hexane. I believe that's a total for the two.
And what sort of packaging does it appear in the facility?
I couldn't tell you, Mr. Meisner.
The alcohol is kept in 55-gallon drums, and by the way, we also use methanol. So when I said isopropyl alcohol and methylperidone, I should have included methanol in there, methyl alcohol. That's also used in the membrane casting operation. The methanol is kept in a 5,000-gallon tank. There's a tank farm in the rear of the facility in a chemical containment area. And in that tank farm is kept N-methylperidone in approximately a 1,500-gallon tank, methanol in a 5,000-gallon tank, and then in assorted smaller tanks ranging in size from 600 gallons to 1,000 gallons, intermediate tanks which are used for reprocessing and reclaiming most of those chemicals.
It's a closed system?
Pretty much a closed system. Water is carried, a mixture of methanol and N-methylperidone is carried into water. That water then goes through some reverse osmosis, and we reclaim most of the water. The methanol is driven off as fumes and into the oxidizer, and the NMP is injected as a liquid into the oxidizer, and this is the basically the drain from the reverse osmosis process. So NMP does not go down down into the sewer system, but is actually piped into the oxidizer. So it's not completely closed because that's where there's some loss of materials. Where the material is particularly successful in reclaiming is the methanol is used to remove the N-methylperidone before it goes into the water. So we reclaim most of that NMP and recycle it. And we also reclaim the methanol that's
How many employees are involved in the process of moving these solvents from their storage to the test and back through the recycling?
It's an automated process, controlled with microprocessors. So the operators are mostly actually just observing machinery and making sure it doesn't mess up. There's typically 2 shifts of employees with about 3 people on each shift, and then a couple of supervisors.
You maintain safety records, of course.
Correct.
Are there any illnesses or injuries among your workers associated with this process?
No.
Okay, thank you.
One more thing, let me throw this out as an exploratory comment. You've indicated that hexane would not be used for the variance period. Can we include that in the variance order without any objection from you?
No objection. That would be fine.
Any further comments from the board or the district? In that case, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm still disturbed by the way this all proceeded. It sounds like that Mr. Meisner has a fairly high-tech and professional operation, but on the one hand, on the other hand, that things were kind of out of control, either because of communication issues or otherwise, for a period. I would almost say from the first contact with the district, and I guess I'd like to understand whether I'm not getting that right, or to get the district's view on how they continued to operate for a number of days before they repaired it, and then after they repaired it, continued to operate in an unknown state of compliance until now.
Well, I suspect it's probably just a matter of communication error, maybe from both parties, maybe us misunderstanding what Mr. Meisner was proposing or suggesting, and I think that's maybe the best that I can offer to you.
I wanted to ask Mr. Meisner, do you have a procedure to inspect these heat exchangers on any kind of a regular basis?
The
The
current
ones that
design
fail?
of, yes, the current design of the heat exchanger is such that you cannot gain access to that region of the oxidizer. When we had the engineering company come out to do the repairs, we replaced 48 of the tubes, but the other tubes, of which there's over 100 of these tubes, will fail. So it's our plan is to replace the entire heat exchanger. We've asked them if there was some way to redesign that heat exchanger to give us access for inspection so that we could actually see the efficacy of the tubes and the quality instead of waiting for a source test failure. So that they've agreed to look at that to try and come up with some way, if possible, for us to have access so that we can actually inspect those on a periodic basis.
But in the interim, you're hoping for a positive result from your October, or wherever the source test was, October 24th, I think. And based on that, then you'll proceed with your operation. This other item you just mentioned, how does that fit into your planning?
Sure.
Replacing these other, or inspecting them, or getting access to them?
When we, in order to see if the heat exchanger was the problem, we needed to remove the heat exchanger using a crane and separate it from some rather large ducting. And one option that was considered was to simply remove that element and take measurements, photographs, and then put that unit back in place and obtain a short-term variance while a new heat exchanger was built. And it was my feeling that if we were going to that much effort to to remove this unit, it made more sense to me to make a repair at the same time, even if it was not going to be a long-term repair. They told me that they estimated that this repair would last 1 to 3 years, and I asked them to what degree of confidence would they have that, and they felt that it was a high degree of confidence. So my goal is, as soon as we do obtain results that the repairs were successful, we'll initiate the next step immediately, which is to replace that heat exchanger. So
That would require a regular variance?
I will talk with Kirby Zazula, but I believe if we can make this just a like for like, meaning we're not changing the capacity of the unit or ostensibly changing the design, that we can do it as a maintenance item. But I will work closely with the APCD to make sure that we're communicating clearly and doing everything that we can to do it properly.
Okay, thank you. One question for the district. On the draft variance on page 7, the petitioner is being asked to tell the district by December 4th if they can't be in compliance by February 3rd. Is that enough time to notice a regular variance?
That is basically 2 months, and I think we typically try and give at least 6 weeks time, and 30 days for public notice and a couple weeks for publication and turn around with the clerk. So I think that's sufficient time to get the job done.
Okay, and one other item that I think is probably just a typo on that same page under item 5. It looks like there's an extra date. I think it should say no later than 10 days after the date for achievement of final compliance in this variance order, with date deleted would fix that.
Yeah, we can do that. Mr. Herlock, the issue of an emergency variance came up, and typically when a piece of equipment fails, it has a total, I won't say total collapse, but a breakdown of a piece of equipment, that's appropriate for an emergency variance. But in situations like this where the source test fails, there isn't any apparent real mechanical failure of a piece of equipment in the control device, then we don't recommend an emergency variance in that case. So I think that may be the reason we didn't direct Mr. Meisner to proceed with the emergency variance route.
Has it been practiced? Maybe I've just not paid attention, but has it been the practice to allow operation in a non-compliant after a failed source test without a variance until the variance process gets taken care of?
Well, we try and notify the parties if it does come down to a point where they do have to continue operating for the sake of their business or part of the process or something, that they do run the risk of being in a continual non-compliance status if your board turns down the variance. So if you were to decide tonight not to grant the variance, then we would lose that enforcement discretion, and you might say all bets would be off.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Stubblefield?
I have a question for the district. This is just a house cleaning question.
Sure.
I don't object to granting the variance, but on page 5 on the draft short variance order, in paragraph 4, it says Meisner curtailed operations prior to the variance. Is that true? Is that factually correct? I'm confused because they did.
Well, I think from what I heard, there was
because it sounds like Mr. Meisner is saying they didn't.
Mr.
I-
Meisner, could you address that, please?
Sure. I may be misunderstood, but when I interpreted curtailment to mean reduced usage, I didn't know that it meant that we would eliminate.
It does
or
mean
stop.
reduced, to me, yeah.
Okay, so.
Okay, so you did reduce.
We did
Yeah.
reduce. I mean, we were dramatically stopped. Most of the days, we were not in operation, which we normally would be in operation during the whole inspection and repair process. And that's where, I think I said it in my, in the petition, it asked if you do curtailment, and I mentioned that we were shut down for a significant number of days. Let me find that in here.
Well, it was in that period between the 6th and the 24th, I gather, right?
Correct. The
October.
24th was when repairs were completed, but we were actually shut down the Monday before that, which would be, I believe, the 16th.
Okay,
Actually, the Friday before that.
thank you. No further questions.
Okay. With nothing further from the board, I don't see any members of the public here, so we will call the hearing closed and ask for discussion by the board members. Dr. Scheck.
It seemed like a relatively small matter that they've taken appropriate action to bring under control. And so I think the draft variance that we've been given provides those things that we need to do. And therefore, I move that we adopt the draft short variance order.
May I ask for a clarification? One of the questions arose whether, one of your board members, whether Mr. Meisner would be agreeable to adding a provision of no hexane use. Can we get some closure on that?
There were several changes in the form also, minor matters. Yes, I think all of those should be incorporated in the draft variance order.
Thank you.
I would move that way.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, for clarification, there's only two changes that I'm aware of. One would be in paragraph 6, where we would add a subsection that during the variance period, Meisner shall not use hexane. And then in page 7, subparagraph B5, delete the word date on the second line. Mr. Duval, did I correctly indicate the changes? Okay.
I'm referring to the question of whether the petitioner had stopped operations. There seemed to be mixed messages on that, and I thought we had changed it to conform to his testimony tonight.
And this would be on page 5, subparagraph 4. Meisner curtailed operations prior to the variance?
Let's see where we are. Yes, that section. Are we all happy with that language? Or do we
think we
need to
are.
refine it? We're all happy with it? Okay, well then there were only two and not several.
And that will be your motion?
That's my motion.
Mr. Gasparino is seconded. The clerk can call the roll.
Mr. Gasparino?
Aye.
Dr. Shackman?
Aye.
Mr. Herlock?
Aye.
Mr. Stubblefield?
Aye.
Chair Neiswinder?
Aye. Mr. Meisner, your petition has been granted. Thank you for your time. Before we adjourn the meeting, I wanted to thank staff for the materials handed out last time. Very helpful, the 2 articles that you sent over. And do we have anything coming up?
We have a hearing scheduled for December 18th. And I'm hoping at that meeting to give a brief summary of an audit that was a district program audit that was conducted by the Air Resources Board over 2 years ago. We just got the audit report.
2 years ago.
2 years ago. And part of that dealt with the hearing board operations. And ARB has suggested a few changes to the procedures that I'd like to review with your board and provide you with some handouts as to what they said in their audit report. And so I'm hoping December 18th to maybe spend 30 minutes or so, and I'll work with the clerk to put that on the agenda, so it's legal.
Okay.
I'm wondering if that discussion involves material you could give to us in advance.
I will, yes, I'll make sure that you get it quite a bit in advance.
Thank you.
Great. Well, with that, if there's no further discussion, then at 6:10, we would call the meeting closed.